Thomas Greene had been driving the number 42 bus route for 12 years, and he'd seen everything. Drunk passengers, fights, people having mental breakdowns, kids skipping school. But the little girl in the purple backpack was different. She got on his bus every night at 9:15 p.m., rode 7 stops, and got off alone in one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. She was maybe 7 years old, too young to be out that late, too young to be riding alone. And when Thomas finally decided to follow her home one night, what he saw made him pull out his phone and dial 911. The call he made that night didn't just save one little girl. It exposed a network that had been operating for years, destroyed families that looked perfect from the outside, and proved that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones hurting children. If you want to see how a bus driver's instinct to protect one child brought down an operation that had victimized dozens, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. This story will break your heart and restore your faith in people who pay attention when everyone else looks away. Thomas Greene was 56 years old and had been driving buses for the City Transit Authority since he was 44. Before that, he'd been a truck driver. But after his daughter was born, he wanted a job that kept him closer to home. Bus driving wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work with decent benefits, and it let him be home for dinner most nights. He drove the evening shift, 4 p.m. to midnight, covering routes through the city's east side. It wasn't the best neighborhood. Lots of poverty, crime, drug activity. But Thomas liked his passengers. He knew the regulars by name. Mrs. Washington, who rode to her night shift at the hospital. Jerome, who worked at the warehouse. Maria, who cleaned office buildings downtown. They were good people working hard jobs, just trying to survive. Thomas had a rule: pay attention. Too many drivers just zoned out, listened to music, ignored their passengers. But Thomas watched. He noticed when someone seemed off, when a teenager looked scared, when an elderly person needed extra time getting on. He'd helped people more times than he could count, called ambulances, talked people down from fights, given directions to shelters. His wife said he cared too much. His supervisor said he should mind his own business. But Thomas couldn't help it. When you spent 8 hours a day watching people, you started to see patterns. You noticed when something was wrong. The little girl in the purple backpack first got on his bus on a Tuesday night in October. Thomas noticed her immediately because she was alone. 7 years old, maybe 8, with dark skin, braided hair, and a purple backpack covered in cartoon characters. She got on at the Maple Street stop at exactly 9:15 p.m., paid with a child's monthly pass, and sat in the front seat across from Thomas. "You okay, sweetheart?" Thomas asked. "Where are your parents?" "I'm going home," she said quietly. "By yourself?" She nodded. "Where's home?" 7th Street, 7 stops away, through 3 neighborhoods that got progressively worse. Thomas felt uneasy, but technically there was no rule against kids riding alone. And maybe her parents were working late. Maybe she was coming from an after-school program. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. The girl rode silently, clutching her backpack, looking out the window. When they reached 7th Street, she got off without a word and walked into the darkness. Thomas watched her go, troubled. But what could he do? Call the police because a kid was riding the bus alone? They'd laugh at him. The next night, same thing. 9:15 p.m., the girl got on. Same purple backpack, same quiet demeanor. She rode to 7th Street and got off. By the 3rd night, Thomas was seriously concerned. He tried talking to her again. "What's your name, honey?" "Keisha." "Keisha, that's a pretty name. Why are you riding the bus so late?" "I have to." "Have to?" "To get home." "Where are you coming from?" "School." Thomas frowned. "School ends at 3. Why are you leaving at 9? Keisha looked at him with eyes that seemed too old for her face. "After-school program. And then I have to clean." "Clean what?" "The classrooms. Ms. Davis makes me clean the classrooms before I can leave." Something cold settled in Thomas's stomach. Your teacher makes you clean. Keisha nodded. Every night? Every night. Does your mom know about this? Keisha's face closed off. I have to go home now. Thomas wanted to ask more questions, but the girl's stop was coming up. She got off and disappeared into the night again. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about it. A 7-year-old being forced to clean classrooms until 9 p.m.? That didn't sound like any after-school program he'd ever heard of. And why was she riding the bus alone through dangerous neighborhoods? On the fourth night, Keisha got on the bus as usual. Thomas decided to push a little harder. Keisha, I'm worried about you, sweetheart. Can you tell me your mom's phone number? I'd like to call her and make sure she knows you're riding the bus this late. Keisha shook her head. I can't. Why not? Because Ms. Davis said I'm not supposed to tell anyone. Tell anyone what? Keisha looked terrified. I can't talk about it. Please don't make me talk about it. Thomas's instincts were screaming now. A teacher making a child work until 9 p.m. A child too scared to talk about it. A child riding alone through dangerous neighborhoods. This wasn't right. Okay, Thomas said gently. You don't have to tell me, but I want you to know something. If someone is hurting you or making you do things you don't want to do, that's wrong. And there are people who can help you. Do you understand? Keisha nodded, but she looked even more scared. When she got off at 7th Street that night, Thomas made a decision. He was going to follow her. He needed to know where she was going and who was supposed to be taking care of her. The next night was Friday. Thomas's shift ended at midnight, but he arranged with another driver to cover the last hour of his route. At 9:15, Keisha got on the bus as usual. Thomas drove the route normally, but when they reached 7th Street and Keisha got off, Thomas watched carefully to see which direction she went. She walked east on 7th toward the housing projects. Thomas waited until she was half a block ahead. Then he carefully drove the bus forward, following her at a distance. He knew this was risky. If anyone reported a bus driver following a child, he could lose his job. But something about this situation felt desperately wrong. Keisha walked 3 blocks, then turned onto a side street. Thomas parked the bus and got out, following on foot now. He stayed far enough back that she wouldn't notice him, but close enough to see where she went. The neighborhood was rough, boarded up buildings, groups of men on corners, broken streetlights. This was no place for a child to be walking alone at 9:30 at night. Keisha turned onto another street, then walked up to a small house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. She didn't go to the front door. Instead, she went around to the back of the house and knocked on what looked like a basement entrance. Thomas crept closer, staying in the shadows. He watched as the door opened and a woman appeared. She was white, maybe 40, with bleached blonde hair and too much makeup. She said something Thomas couldn't hear, and Keisha nodded and went inside. Thomas waited, uncertain what to do. Maybe this was Keisha's home. Maybe the woman was her mother or guardian. Maybe everything was fine, but his instinct said otherwise. Thomas moved closer to the house, trying to see through windows. The main floor appeared dark and empty, but there was light coming from the basement windows, covered with what looked like sheets. Thomas crouched down and tried to look through a gap in one of the sheets. What he saw made his blood run cold. The basement had been converted into a workspace. There were several long tables with children sitting at them. Not just Keisha, 6 or 7 other children. All young, all working on something. Sewing, it looked like. They were sewing clothing by hand, their small fingers working quickly. The blonde woman was walking between the tables, watching them work. As Thomas watched, one of the children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8, stopped to rub his eyes. The woman grabbed his shoulder roughly and said something that made the boy flinch. He immediately went back to work. Thomas pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report child exploitation, Thomas said quietly. Multiple children are being held in a basement, being forced to work. I'm at 247 Oakwood Street, the house with the blue trim. Please send police immediately. Sir, can you tell me what you're seeing? There are at least 7 children in a basement, working at tables, sewing clothes. There's an adult woman supervising them. This isn't right. These kids should be home in bed, not working at 10 o'clock at night. Stay on the line, sir. Police are on their way. Do not approach the house. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Thomas stayed crouched by the window, watching the children work. His heart was pounding. If he was wrong, if this was somehow legitimate, he could be in serious trouble. But he knew he wasn't wrong. Those children were being exploited, forced to work, kept in a basement. 5 minutes later, police cars pulled up. Thomas stood and waved them over. 3 officers got out, and Thomas quickly explained what he'd seen. I followed a little girl who rides my bus every night. She's 7 years old, riding alone at 9 p.m. through dangerous neighborhoods. She told me her teacher makes her clean classrooms, but I watched her come here instead. There are multiple children inside that basement, working. The lead officer, a woman with sergeant stripes, looked skeptical. You followed a child? I was worried about her. She's too young to be out alone that late. And I was right to be worried. Look through that window. The sergeant crouched down and looked where Thomas indicated. Her expression changed immediately. Call for backup, she told the other officers, and get child services here now. The officers approached the house. 1 went to the front door, while 2 went to the basement entrance, where Thomas had seen Keisha go in. The sergeant knocked loudly. Police! Open the door! For a moment, nothing happened. Then the basement door opened and the blonde woman appeared, looking confused and annoyed. What's this about? She demanded. We received a report of children being held on this property. We need to see inside. I don't know what you're talking about. This is my home. Ma'am, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Open the door and let us see the basement, or we'll get a warrant. The woman's face went pale. You can't just barge in here without... The sergeant pushed past her. The other officers followed. Thomas waited outside, his heart pounding. 2 minutes later, the officers emerged with 7 children. Keisha was among them, still clutching her purple backpack. The children looked exhausted and scared. Some were crying. The blonde woman was brought out in handcuffs, protesting loudly. Those kids were just visiting. This is a misunderstanding. You can't arrest me. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. The sergeant came over to Thomas. You did the right thing calling this in. Those kids were being exploited. Forced labor. We found dozens of finished garments down there. Commercial tags. Everything. This woman was running a sweatshop using children. Thomas felt sick. Is Keisha going to be okay? Child services is on the way. We'll make sure all these kids get to safety. Can you stay and give a statement? Of course. Over the next hour, Thomas told the police everything. How he'd first noticed Keisha riding his bus alone. How she'd mentioned a teacher making her clean. How he'd followed her and discovered the basement operation. A child services worker arrived and started talking to the children. Thomas watched as Keisha sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, looking small and lost. Thomas approached carefully. Hey, Keisha, remember me? From the bus? She looked up and nodded. You're safe now, okay? These people are going to take care of you. No one's going to make you work anymore. Is Ms. Davis going to be mad at me? Keisha asked in a small voice. Ms. Davis is the one who's in trouble, not you. None of this is your fault. She said if I told anyone, something bad would happen to my mom. Thomas's heart broke. Where is your mom, sweetheart? I don't know. Ms. Davis said she would tell me where my mom is if I worked hard. She said my mom owed her money and I had to work to pay it back. Thomas looked at the child services worker who'd been listening. Her expression was grim. We'll find your mom, the worker said gently to Keisha. But right now we need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can sleep and eat and be a kid. Would that be okay? Keisha nodded, tears streaming down her face. As child services took the children away, The sergeant came back to Thomas. We're going to need you to come to the station tomorrow and give a full formal statement. This is going to be a big case. That woman, her name is Patricia Davis. We've been trying to catch her for years. She runs a network of these operations, uses vulnerable kids, usually with parents who are addicts or in debt, forces the kids to work, threatens them to keep them quiet. Keisha said Davis told her she'd tell her where her mom is if she worked hard enough. Classic manipulation. We'll look into it. Thanks to you, we finally have her. And we can start helping those kids. Thomas drove home that night exhausted and shaken. He kept seeing Keisha's face, those small hands sewing in that basement. A 7-year-old who should have been playing and learning, not working 12-hour days for nothing. When he got home, his wife was still awake. "You're late," she said. Then she saw his face. "What happened?" Thomas told her everything. When he finished, she hugged him tightly. "You saved that little girl," she said. "I should have done something sooner. She'd been riding my bus for a week. You didn't know, but when you suspected something was wrong, you acted. That's what matters." The story hit the news the next morning. Child labor ring busted. Patricia Davis was the main perpetrator, but the investigation quickly expanded. Police discovered she wasn't working alone. She had connections to several schools, to social services, to a network of people who identified vulnerable children and fed them into her operation. The 7 children rescued from the basement were just the beginning. As police dug deeper, they found 12 more children working in 2 other locations, all of them under 10 years old, all of them being exploited. The community was in shock. How had this been happening in plain sight? How had no one noticed? But Thomas knew how, because people didn't pay attention. They saw a kid alone on a bus and assumed someone was taking care of them. They saw a child who looked tired and assumed they were just having a rough day. They didn't ask questions because they didn't want to get involved. Thomas was called to testify before a grand jury. He told them about Keisha, about following her, about what he'd seen in that basement. The prosecutor said his testimony was crucial to the case. "You're a hero," the prosecutor told him. Thomas didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd done what anyone should have done. Pay attention, care, act. The case against Patricia Davis expanded. She was charged with multiple counts of child exploitation, human trafficking, forced labor, and kidnapping. Several of her associates were also arrested, including 2 school administrators who'd been identifying vulnerable children for her. The trial took months. Thomas attended as much as he could. He wanted to see it through. He wanted to make sure justice was served for Keisha and the other children. During the trial, the full scope of Davis's operation came out. She'd been running it for 8 years. She targeted children with single parents, parents with addiction problems, parents who were undocumented or involved in illegal activities. She'd convinced the parents to let their children participate in an after-school work program, promising payment that never came. She'd threatened the parents with deportation, with losing custody, with prosecution. The parents, desperate and scared, would comply. The children would work for hours every day, sewing clothes that Davis sold to discount retailers. The retailers claimed they didn't know about the child labor. They claimed they thought they were buying from legitimate manufacturers, but the investigation suggested some of them had deliberately looked the other way because Davis's prices were so low. Keisha testified. She was 8 years old now, living with a foster family, getting therapy. She told the court about her mother, who'd had a drug problem and owed Davis money. Davis had said she'd help the mom get clean if Keisha worked for her. Keisha had believed her. She'd worked every day after school for 6 months before Thomas followed her. "I was tired all the time," Keisha said quietly, "but Ms. Davis said if I worked hard enough, I could see my mom again." The defense attorney tried to paint Davis as a small business owner, providing opportunities to underprivileged children. The prosecutor demolished that argument by showing photos of the basement, time records showing 12-hour workdays, and medical records showing the children had injuries from the work. Patricia Davis was convicted on all counts. She was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Her associates received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. The school administrators who'd helped her were fired and prosecuted. The children began the slow process of healing. Some were reunited with cleaned-up parents. Others were placed in foster care. All of them received counseling and support. Keisha's mother completed a drug treatment program and got custody back. Thomas met her once at a victim impact statement hearing. She was young, maybe 30, with the same dark skin and braided hair as her daughter. She hugged Thomas and cried. "You saved my baby," she said. "If you hadn't followed her that night, who knows how long this would have gone on. Thank you. Thank you for seeing her when I couldn't." Thomas hugged her back. "Take care of her. She's a special kid." "I will. I promise." 6 months after the arrests, the City Transit Authority held a ceremony honoring Thomas. They gave him an award for extraordinary service and courage. The mayor gave a speech. Local news covered it. Thomas felt embarrassed by all the attention. "I just did what I thought was right," he told the reporters. "Any decent person would have done the same." But that wasn't true. Dozens of people had seen Keisha riding that bus alone over the weeks and months. Other drivers had driven that route. Passengers had sat near her. No one else had followed up. No one else had asked questions. No one else had cared enough to act. Thomas went back to driving his route. He still worked the evening shift, 4 p.m. to midnight. He still knew his regular passengers by name. He still paid attention, and people started paying attention to him. Parents told their kids, "That's Mr. Thomas. He's the man who saved those children." Passengers thanked him. Strangers recognized him and shook his hand. But the person who meant the most came on a Tuesday evening, about 8 months after the rescue. Thomas was driving his route when he saw a small figure waiting at the Maple Street stop. Purple backpack, braided hair. Keisha got on the bus with her mother. She was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since Thomas had met her. "Hi, Mr. Thomas," she said shyly. "Hi, Keisha. Good to see you." "Sweetheart." "We moved," Keisha's mother explained. "We live on the west side now. Better neighborhood. But Keisha wanted to ride your bus one more time. To say thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Thomas said. "Yes, I do," Keisha said seriously. She pulled something from her backpack, a drawing. It showed a bus with a driver who looked like Thomas. Standing next to the bus were 7 stick figures, all holding hands and smiling. "I made this for you," Keisha said. "That's you and that's me and all the other kids you saved, because you paid attention." Thomas felt his eyes get wet. He took the drawing carefully. "This is beautiful, Keisha. I'm going to keep this forever." "Ms. Davis is in jail now," Keisha said. "She can't hurt anyone anymore. Because of you." "Because of you, too," Thomas said gently. "You were brave. You kept going even when you were scared. You survived. That took courage." Keisha smiled again. "I'm in 3rd grade now, at a good school, and I get to play after school instead of working. I'm learning soccer." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Keisha and her mother rode a few stops, just to be on Thomas's bus. When they got off, Keisha waved. "Bye, Mr. Thomas. Thank you for saving me." Thomas waved back, his heart full. He drove the rest of his route with Keisha's drawing propped up where he could see it. 7 children, holding hands, smiling. Children who got to be children again, because someone had paid attention. A year after the rescue, Thomas was invited to speak at a conference on child welfare. He stood in front of 200 social workers, teachers, law enforcement officers, and advocates. He told them Keisha's story. And then he told them what he'd learned. "Child exploitation happens in plain sight," Thomas said. "It happens on buses, in schools, in neighborhoods. But we don't see it because we're not looking. We're busy with our own lives. We assume someone else will handle it. We don't want to get involved." He paused, looking around the room. "I'm just a bus driver. I'm not a social worker or a cop or a hero. I'm just someone who paid attention. I saw a little girl who didn't look right, who was out too late, riding alone, seeming scared, and I couldn't ignore that. I had to know she was safe. Here's what I want everyone in this room to understand, Thomas continued. You don't need special training to protect children. You don't need a badge or a degree. You just need to pay attention. Notice when something seems wrong. Ask questions. Care enough to act. Because if I had ignored Keisha, if I had just driven my route and minded my own business like I was supposed to, she'd still be in that basement. 7 children would still be working 12-hour days. Patricia Davis would still be operating. The room was silent. So I'm asking all of you to pay attention. See the children around you. Notice when something's wrong. And when you see something, say something. Call the police. Call child services. Call someone. Because children can't protect themselves. They need adults who care enough to act. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. People came up to Thomas afterward, thanking him, telling him they'd been moved by his words, promising to pay more attention. But the person who mattered most was waiting outside the conference room. Keisha, now 9 years old, with her mother. They'd been in the audience. I wanted to hear you speak, Keisha said. I wanted to hear you tell our story. How did I do? Thomas asked. You did good, Keisha said seriously. You told the truth. And now maybe other people will pay attention like you did. Maybe other kids will get saved. Thomas crouched down to her level. Are you okay, Keisha? Really okay? I have nightmares sometimes, she said honestly. About the basement. About Ms. Davis. But my therapist says that's normal. And the nightmares are getting less. And I have my mom back. And we have a nice apartment. And I'm doing good in school. So yeah, I'm okay. I'm proud of you, Thomas said. I'm proud of you too, Mr. Thomas. You're my hero. 3 years after the rescue, Thomas retired from bus driving. He was 59, ready to spend more time with his grandkids. But he didn't stop working. He became a volunteer with a child advocacy organization, training people to recognize signs of exploitation and abuse. He told Keisha's story hundreds of times. Each time he emphasized the same points. Pay attention, ask questions, care enough to act. The ripple effects of that one night continued. Laws were changed to increase monitoring of after-school programs. Schools were required to track which children were staying late and why. Transit systems implemented programs to watch for children traveling alone at inappropriate times. But more important than the policy changes were the individual actions. Teachers who noticed a child seeming exhausted and asked why. Neighbors who saw kids coming and going at odd hours and reported it. Bus drivers, taxi drivers, store clerks, regular people who paid attention and acted when something seemed wrong. In the 5 years following Keisha's rescue, authorities uncovered and shut down 23 similar operations across the state. Over 100 children were freed. Several were discovered because someone had heard Thomas's story and decided to pay attention to what they were seeing. Keisha grew up. She graduated from high school. She got accepted to college on a full scholarship. She wanted to study social work, to help other kids like her. On her 18th birthday, she visited Thomas at his home. She'd grown into a confident young woman, ready to take on the world. I wanted to thank you one more time, she said, for seeing me, for caring, for saving my life. You saved your own life, Thomas said, by surviving, by being brave, by getting through it. I just helped. You did more than help, Mr. Thomas. You gave me my life back. You gave all of us our lives back. And now I'm going to spend my life doing what you taught me, paying attention, seeing the children who need help, acting when I see something wrong. Thomas hugged her. You're going to do great things, Keisha. I learned from the best. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that paying attention matters and that one person who cares can change everything, then share it. Share it with teachers, with bus drivers, with neighbors, with anyone who might see a child in trouble. Share it with people who think they can't make a difference. Share it with anyone who needs to know that noticing and caring and acting still matters. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we're bringing you more stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things just by paying attention. About people who saw something wrong and refused to look away. About the power of one person who cares. Thomas Greene was just a bus driver. He didn't have special powers. He didn't have special training. He just noticed a little girl who didn't look right, and he cared enough to follow her. That choice saved 7 children from exploitation, brought down a criminal network, and changed laws to protect thousands more children. You can do the same thing. Pay attention to the children around you. Notice when something seems wrong. Ask questions. Trust your instincts. And when you see something, say something. Call the police. Call child services. Tell someone. Because children are counting on adults to protect them. Be the adult who notices. Be the person who cares. Be the one who acts. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to pay attention. Share this video. Tag someone who works with children. And remember, Keisha was rescued because one bus driver decided she mattered enough to follow. Your attention could save a life too.